Welcome to the Meta One Coin Report, exploring the world of private digital currency through the eyes of human rights and empowerment of humanity. Here's your host, Leanne Carroll.
Are you living in the jurisdiction of the original United States Republic where the Bill of Rights applies to you? Or are you living in the jurisdiction of the United States Corporation where you have no rights at all? If there were a way to remove yourself from the system of perpetual debt and dishonor, would you want to know how? In this episode, we talk with Justin, who is highly knowledgeable on the topics of financial freedom and personal freedom. He takes us through a brief history through time in commerce and identifies what a legal fiction is and the difference between the organic republic of the United States and the United States of America. Did you know there was a difference? What changed? When did it change? And why don't we know about it? Justin is here to talk with us about universal law. It is more than a website. It is more than an education. It is one of the single most important things you can discover in your lifetime. Please join me in welcoming Justin to the podcast. Hello, Justin. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Leanne, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. I'm so glad you could take time out of your day to visit with us. I wanted to talk about universal law and the great paradigm shift that is taking place right now. And most people listening to this conversation are new to the concept of secured party creditor, what it means to be a human, what it means to be a fiction, and the idea of a private trust. So I'd like to open with a quote from Robert P. Dunlap, founder of Meta One Coin Trust and Universal Law Services Division for personal freedom. He says, operating in commerce as a secured party creditor with a private non-statutory trust truly makes a person human again by restoring one's dignity and civil liberties. One becomes a master of one's own destiny instead of being a slave to the system. There's so much loaded in that one statement, and I wanted to not necessarily take a deep dive, but that's ultimately what I'd like our listeners to understand after maybe a series of these podcasts, or maybe even going on to Universal Law website themselves and doing some investigation and maybe joining the movement of freedom. And you are the project manager of Universal Law, and you've actually been very, very you put a lot of development into the Universal Law website and its instruments. So in order to be able to do that, you would have to have a big background of knowledge. And I know that you are a huge library of information. What started you on your journey?
That's a great question. I think my journey started a long time ago. From some of my first memories of thinking about the way that we live on this planet and kind of questioning why things are the way they are, such as why do we pay for housing to live? Why do we pay for food when we're supposed to be endowed with these rights that are supposed to be given by the divine in this physical reality? And so through my awakening process, I kind of went through levels of that, because at the end of the day, all of this that we're doing, everything that it's about, the paperwork and all of that, it's all the beginning of gaining our freedom on a third dimensional physical level, and that's just one layer of it. But, once you open up that rabbit hole, as there are several other rabbit holes and they just go deeper and deeper and deeper. So I actually got into a situation where I was forced to learn. I just ended up with a massive amount of debt, just like lots of other people out there. And I was looking for solutions. I sort of learned a bit about how corrupt the financial system is in this country and around the world, and how illegal many of the practices are. And I started to understand that it wasn't them that was the victim. I was the the one who was being duped. And so I really decided to dive more and more into the legal realm, into lawful procedure, and it kind of just snowballed from there and was organically moving in a direction of not only um, looking to free myself from a ball and chain of debt, but then also wanting to free myself on every level possible. And um, that journey is continuing. I think we always continue on it because there's never another layer, another level, another layer, another level. But um, yeah, it's like a complete shift in consciousness. It's a complete shift in how you think, how you act, and really empowering yourself.
That's true. And most people don't realize that they can empower themselves. The things that we learn in school, including higher education, don't cover the information that we're going to be talking about today. And as a matter of fact, the more educated you are, the further away you are from being able to understand these things, I think, once you get into the system a little deeper. And
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of what we learn in school is propaganda. It's not really education. It's a whitewashed version of, or usually 95% of it is not really truthful information about how the system works. I mean, if you think about it, they don't even teach any kind of finance in school. I always wondered that when I was in high school. It's like, why are we not learning how to run a business and, how commerce works? Because that's what we're going to have to do when we get out of here. And yeah, absolutely 100%. You get dumbed down. It's really not about education. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so that I was homeschooled, because that was a huge gift of not having to be indoctrinated with the system, because it is an indoctrination.
yeah, and it makes you think in a certain way. It doesn't really educate you. It programs your mind so that you don't see these things. And I love how a friend of mine says that you graduate with your hand out. You don't
Yeah.
learn how to find the way for yourself. And actually, I think some schools are better at it, but they don't really teach you very much about yourself either.
No.
So, how did all this begin in our history? Let's sort of start with the basics. What do you mean by free? And what do you mean by separating yourself? Why do you need to be free? And why do you need to be unentangled and
Sure.
unencumbered?
Sure. So we have to sort of rewind the clock back to 1776 at the beginning of the United States of America. And, I'm going to do a abbreviated version. Of course, there's a lot, and we pack a lot of information into some of the coursework that we provide. But basically, the founding fathers, signed the Declaration of Independence, and we became a nation. And then we fast forward through a lot of different back and forth wars and fighting and all of these specific things. And actually, one of the things with wars, of course, is that they cost a lot of money. And they've gotten more expensive, but even back when the founding fathers were alive, they were expensive. And so you have to think about these men who came over from England, like Washington and Benjamin Franklin. They weren't that wealthy, and so they didn't really have the capital to be able to pay for the men and the arms they needed to defeat the British. And so they borrowed money from sovereigns in Europe. And a long story short, they borrowed money over and over and over again. And we actually basically became a debt-laden nation with its inception. And that kind of snowballed over and over again in pledging different assets to be able to refinance loans that they were taking and continue to build out the country. Because basically after 1776 we had a war-torn land, and you had a country that was full of wilderness, and they wanted to expand, and that cost money too. So basically, a long story short, where we move all the way up to the mid 1800s, and at this point in time, the sovereigns in Europe, these bonds that they would issue to borrow money or to lend money to the United States of America, was up for payment again. And basically, before this, the government had already auctioned off, or basically pledged, the land of the entire continental the United States to back these bonds that they were continuing to take out over and over again. And the only thing that was left was the people. And so, of course, human beings are really the only substance in this world. We are the only ones who make everything possible. Things like gold wouldn't exist if there wasn't human beings to dig it up, to refine it, to use it as a currency. Everything moves and circulates around human beings in this world. And so we're incredibly valuable to the certain people, certain entities. And so basically what happened was there was a bill passed in 1871 called the Act to provision a government for the District of Columbia. And it basically did two things. Number one, it took the organic republic that we were, and it conveyed it into a legal entity, or an ens legis, we call it, which basically just means creature of the law. And Congress became the board of trustees, and they renamed themselves Congress in all uppercase letters. And basically, you can think of it as Walmart, or you can think about it as Target. It's the same sort of legal structure. And what this allowed them to do is operate in commerce easier. They were, even to this day, we're continuing to take loans from a private bank, the Federal Reserve. And by transacting business to business, it's much easier to do. You're also not having the liability that a lot of the individuals within government had before 1871, because all of these different loans that they were taking for wars and things like that, people would actually have to be like, I'm going to pay this back, or a group of men would have to do that within the government. So and basically what happened after that is a development of a birth certificate system. So this entire history, and it's spelled out in much more detail in our courses, but the entire history is sort of, when you finally look at it, you can see how each generation there was kind of a setup to the system that we have now. It started in 1871 with this conveying in the United States into a corporation. So the United States of America became the United States in all uppercase letters, or United States Inc., as some people like to call it, to differentiate it between the original republic. And then after that, there was a creation of the birth certificate system, where everyone was required, when we were born, to fill out a birth certificate, the parent, and sign this birth certificate. And before that, that wasn't really something that happened. There were sort of records of births, like kept in the family Bible or whatever it was, or whatever way that you kept track of your family, but there wasn't like a state sanctioned birth process. So there was an act passed to create this birth certificate system. And it seemed like it was for record purposes, but then they started using that birth certificate as the requirement to be able to get anything and everything that a human being would need to operate in the world, like a social security card. Once social security administration was passed, a driver's license, identification, those sorts of things. And they would also deny you services if you didn't have a birth certificate. This is because the real reason behind the birth certificate system was to continue to feed the beast, the creditors that were lending money to the United States. So when a human being is born in the United States of America, their parents sign that birth certificate. That is actually doing two things. It's conveying them into a end legis, just like the United States did with that act in 1871. So it's making a corporation in your name. And the only difference in that the only differentiating factor is the uppercase name. So if you've ever noticed when you get a piece of mail that has to do with commerce from your bank, from any financial institution, your name is always in uppercase letters. Why is that? It's not because the post office has a hard time reading your name and they need to be able to see it in bold letters. It's because all corporations' legal entity names are in uppercase letters. And so not only was a corporation created, but then as well, they would monetize that corporation. How do they do that? Basically, the premise is this: you as a human being are the surety. Surety just basically means you're the backing asset for this corporation, and they would create a bond or several bonds, and they trade these bonds on international stock markets, and they make a lot of money off of them. And so basically, you get caught up in this system, and in return for basically having all of these using your assets, which is your future labor, you get benefits and privileges. And what do I mean by benefits and privileges? I mean things like Social Security, things like this Obamacare we have going on now, things like these sorts of things, like a driver's license, things like that. But the agreement, this is called, basically, we call them invisible contracts. The invisible contract that you're in with the United States basically says, well, in return for giving you benefits, you have to listen to our corporate public policy. And that's anything from, you have to wear a mask in the store, to you're speeding down the highway and we're going to give you a ticket because we put it in public policy, and and you are the public, so you have to listen to these regulations and rules. And so the thing is 95% of the people that live in the United States of America do not understand this. They do not know that this is what's happening, and there's such a lack of education when it comes to the legal system and the way that it's set up, that nobody can navigate through it. And there's a sort of disposition around the law that prevents people from diving into it themselves. They think they have to go to a lawyer. They think legalese is too much for them. They think it's just so confusing and complex. And yeah, I mean, I'll agree. If you look at the statutory side, there's millions of laws, and no one could ever know all of them. But like I said, that's public policy. That is policy that is brought down from the United States corporation, and you are only subject to those policies if you're within their jurisdiction. And how are you within their jurisdiction? Because your parents signed that birth certificate that basically gave them suretyship, or rights over you. And so It's very interesting because I have a very different perspective around, and you really start to open your eyes when you dive into this stuff. When you look out in the world today, and you have all of these people in the United States saying things like, "Our constitutional rights are being walked all over," freedom of speech, we should be allowed to say whatever we want to say, and so on and so forth. And yeah, if you were in the jurisdiction of the original republic, the United States of America, you totally have that right to say that, because that was the original constitution and that's how it was established. But you don't have that right to say that if you are a US citizen, because a US citizen is in the jurisdiction of the United States. And you have agreed over and over again, you every time you file your taxes, every time you sign any kind of government piece of documentation or paper, every time you take a benefit and a privilege, like a stimulus check, you are agreeing again that you are a US citizen and that you're going to continue to take those benefits and privileges. And in return, the United States can monetize you, and you have to follow their laws, or I shouldn't say laws, I should say public policy. So
Right. And this choice was never given to you, and it was never made clear to your parents that the required birth certificate is that's what it's doing. And isn't there an aspect of that too, where you're considered like the human that was born is considered lost at sea, stolen or lost at sea, and then the
yes.
new identity, like as evidence of your birth, your foot is stamped, your blood is drawn, and the real human did exist, but here is a replacement.
Yeah, yeah, and that's getting into Admiralty Law. Admiralty Law basically goes back a very long time. It is the law of the sea. It Why it's called the law of the sea is it did originate from maritime law, and but it's the law of the sea is more of a commercial body. It's more thinking in a commercial sense versus the ocean, and so
I
yes.
see.
Basically what they look they what they do is, why it's called birth. This is very interesting, actually. Why it's called birth is because that word birth, BIRTH, originates from the word birth with an E, which is the birth of a ship. So when a ship is births, that's why they call it a birth. And so what happens is exactly what you talked about, where when a woman, which is the vessel, basically gives birth to this new human being, that is when it is docked into the United States corporation. So that's why, and when does that docking happen? That docking happens when the birth certificate is signed by your parents. So if you're doing this in the traditional sense, and you go to a hospital and you give birth, and then that's why the nurse comes in within 24 hours and says you've got to fill out this birth certificate and sign it. And that's when the docking happens. And through that conveyance, you're basically saying this child, this human being, is lost at sea. It's a vessel that's lost at sea, and we're basically conveying the rights to this vessel over to you. And then they convey that into a corporation, which is a commercial vessel. We sort of think about, there are two like major realms of law in positive law, which is the private side and the public side. So the public side is where all the piece of the wall, where all the paper resides, where all the corporations resides. That's where Walmart is. That's where the United States is. That's where all of the corporations that were in likeness of us reside. And so, and then on the private side is where all of the human beings reside, us, the flesh and blood men and women. So I like to use an analogy. Mostly everybody has seen The Matrix. You've seen it, right? And so it's like the Matrix. When Neo and Morpheus are within the Matrix, they're actually in their digital bodies. That is the commercial side. That is the public side. And when Neo and Morpheus on the Nebuchadnezzar in the real world, that is the private side. And
I love that. I make that
yeah.
analogy myself.
Yeah, and then that's the thing, is that we as human beings in this world, you have to operate in commerce. I mean, that's not the bad thing about this. The corporation side of it, that sort of ens legis, a creature of law. It's a logical concept, because you have to convey when you walk out your door and you go down the street and you swipe your debit card to buy a coffee or fill up your tank at the gas station, that's something you have to do. You have to operate in commerce. And human beings on their own cannot operate in commerce, because we don't have a way to bridge that gap between the private side and the public side. And that's what a legal entity can do. What's terrible about this whole thing is that we have been in these invisible, unconscionable contracts for centuries and generations, and it is slavery. That's what it is. I mean, I always say slavery was not abolished when Abraham Lincoln, decided to do that. It just transferred from a physical slavery to a legal slavery. And it's just mind blowing how much they've gotten away with all of this over the generations and generations. And like you were saying about school, it's the kind of thing where not only is it propaganda, but it's indoctrination to a point that when people hear this information, their first reaction is, you're crazy. There's no way this is true. You're out of your mind. But the more that you look into it, and that's sort of what our courses do, is this is not just me talking. We dive into the legal, public policy, public record stuff. We show you things from the records of Congress. We show you things from the law books. We show you things that are in specific court cases that back all of this up, that show you that it's actually real and legitimate, and is something that I think is one of the most important subjects to learn about and continue to learn about, to regain your freedom again.
I agree. And the Universal Law website is a place to educate yourself. There's over 10 hours of video. And just to let you know, I took 6 pages of notes in the first 15 minutes. It is power packed. It teaches you the grounds for the understanding, what you need to know. And I really don't even like using the word understanding. It gives you the grounds for your perception to understand. I'm saying understand again. It does give you the history lesson that you don't get in school. How's that? Yeah.
For sure.
So you're talking about, that kind of gives us, and that's what Universal Law is doing. It's bringing the personal slavery, or the slavery of the person, into the light, and allowing everyday people to be able to find out about this and to be able to do something about it.
Yes.
Yes. And traditionally, something like this would be very expensive. It would be, it's usually taught, I would say, through mentorship and one-on-one or small groups. And Universal Law is packaged in a way that you take action steps yourself, completely guided. You completely know exactly what you're doing and exactly why. And there's a support system.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole concept but behind this is, you can't have a free financial system, which we're helping to create over at Meta One, and not have give people freedom in a legal sense, because it just doesn't. The two don't. If you don't have one, the other one doesn't work. and we've learned that firsthand. So we really wanted to convey this into a program that was going to be very straightforward, that was going to break these concepts down um, into the best possible understanding for everybody, so that no matter what walk of life you come from, if you have been an attorney for 15 years, or if you've never read a single lick of law in your entire life, you can understand these concepts and be able to, start your journey. But it's a beginning, and it's a start of your journey. And the way that we've set it up is we've set it up really to empower you. We're not here to hold your hand, because that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to empower you, give you the tools to free yourself. But then after freeing yourself, you have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you have to continue to do the work. And I always say becoming free in this way, in a legal sense, is a continual journey of learning and a lifestyle change. You have to completely change the way that you live your life. And you have to really continue to be dedicated to learning and growing, and, being the king or queen of your own castle, because that is the way the original United States of America was set up. That was the dream of the founding fathers, that the power came from the people, truly, that we were all kings and queens in our own castles. And from there, we dictated to the local governments, the regional governments, and then the large government in New York at that time, um, that what we wanted, and they would carry out. It was supposed to be, the government was supposed to be the steward of the people, and it's completely turned around in the other way, where we are at the whim of a corporation that is, has no more authority than Walmart does. Do we
Right.
walk around every day on the street and follow Walmart's policies? No, we don't.
I love it. So I want to talk to you about the process of bridging the gap between public and private. And I like to look at it as a parallel universe. You can
Mm,
be you can be a private person operating in private commerce, but out in the public world.
sure.
And you're aware that you're doing both, because you're educated now and you're free and you're empowered. And I don't want to scare anybody when you said there's a lot of changes you have to make, and people's minds automatically go to, well, I have to renounce my driver's license and my
Sure.
citizenship and all that stuff. So
Sure.
let's talk about ways that you can live a normal life freely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I refine that statement. I should say that there's a lot of, I think, mental ways that you have to change your life, and energetic ways that you have to change your life.
And it's really a
Um,
welcome change once you begin to learn, because you really don't want
yes.
anything to do with the system.
Trust me, if I could throw my driver's license out the window tomorrow, I would do it. And I could, but that's another level that I'm not sure I'm ready for yet. But um, no, I mean, doing this process, you do not have to really, in terms of those kinds of questions, which we answer in the course, but in those kinds of questions, around your driver's license, or the biggest one I always get is, can you continue to take security? And you can, because of the way that you have to think about the structure. Okay, you are um, a human being on the private side, and your legal entity, or we call it the straw man, is the most common popular term, is on the public side, and it's a completely separate entity from you. So you're not actually taking Social Security. Your corporation is, your straw man is. And so there's you just have to, once you dive into the education and you have those light bulb moments where your perspective changes and you sort of understand, you look at the world in a completely different way, and those sorts of questions will sort of be answered on your own if you just think about it in a logical sense. So now, of course, I personally stay from all of that stuff. I will never take Social Security ever. I don't take stimulus checks. I don't do any of those things because I want to not have any of these contracts. I want to not have any of these invisible contracts with me because technically, if you think about it, all of these different things are contracts, and they're, even using US dollars as a contract, and that's why we're working on Meta One. But in terms of, somebody who wants to take it slow, let's say, and not just rush into it and feel like I have to just burn my burn my debit cards and my driver's license tomorrow, um, you absolutely can, and it's really, there's not a ton that's going to change in your life in terms of the way you operate on a regular basis.
Okay, good. And what we're talking about is the secured party creditor process,
Mhm.
turning yourself from
Yep.
a
So that's
debtor to a person operating in equity in commerce.
that's right. You become a creditor instead of a debtor. That's the legal sort of idea around all of this. And actually, this process was created by judges back in the early 1900s because they wanted to get out of the system, and so they created this process, and then it's sort of been filtered up through and evolved, and people have learned from it. And so this is a really powerful process. It's basically just a process of filing some paperwork. Our system not only starts you off with education, like you were talking about, Leanne, we've got a 10-hour e-learning course. And then from there, we walk you through step by step the process. But the nice thing is while after you've completed the 10-hour course and passed an exam, because we're serious about this, we really need to understand the fundamentals. You're going to feel really comfortable going through this process because you're going to have the basic and understanding and the foundation of what you're doing, because that's really important, because a lot of people get when they see this paperwork, if you don't have that education, it's kind of daunting, and you sort of feel like, oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into? But when you have the understanding, the basis, and we actually go through paragraph by paragraph in the education what everything means. And I'm a big proponent of opening up the dictionary, learning definitions, learning words, because in the legal world, words mean very different things. A person in the legal sense is not just a human being, it is a corporation, it is a partnership, it is a trust, it's pretty much any legal entity. And so that's also the sort of awakening process that you have when you sort of start to gain more and more of this knowledge, is you start to see the reality of things, and how intricate the matrix is. And how, when you read something after you learn the definition of, let's say, word like person, you read a legal document, or even read some of the public policies that we have in place, that the United States corporation has in place, it gives you a completely different perspective, because you're like, wow, I didn't realize that when I was reading this before. And it empowers you, because this system is based on fear, and it's based on intimidation, and it's based on smoke and mirrors. And when you really dive into the understanding around this, and you start to learn words and concepts, and you start to really get out there and operate, because that's what I suggest to everybody, is once you've gone through this process, this is not the kind of thing where you just do it and you just forget about it. You want to get out there and you want to operate. We provide you at the end of the course with a library of about, I think it's like 15 documents, that are, a lot of them are super long, and really interesting and in depth on different topics. related to these to secured party, and also related to different area of law, like the freedom to travel movement and things like that. And this provides you with a structure to be able to move forward in your own self-learning. And we are building out a online community right now. So in the near future, we're going to have a place for people to get together and really learn from each other and talk to each other, and just build out a community in which in the future, I hope that we can have some regional study groups and things like this to be able to help people just move forward in this process and learning experience, because it's a lifelong learning experience, and it's a very valuable one.
It is. I have to share this with you. I was paying I traveled on a toll tag that I traveled on a toll road that I don't have a toll tag for. So of course I received a bill, and you have to pay those things. And when I was entering my credit card information, the button, it made me laugh. It said submit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm submitting, and you look at things like that instead of just hitting the submit button because you're submitting your payment. It means so much more.
Yeah.
Then, so
absolutely.
I did want to just ask you about some elements of secured party process.
Sure.
So if you could just do a broad overview, like what are you saying when you are going through a secured party process? Just some ideas.
So we have to start with the concept that we are all sovereign human beings. We are sovereign, sentient beings. We have endowed rights by our creator, not from some constitution or whatever, but these are rights that are endowed to us the moment that we were born on this planet, because we're all part of source, whatever you believe that is. So we have to start acting like that, because what has happened is this indoctrination that we've talked about, and we have become these popular word slave sheeple, and people don't like to think about themselves like that, but unfortunately the reality is that that's what most people are. And so with this process, we first are laying the foundation and giving you an understanding in the education and the e-learning course, what these concepts are, what the history is, how we've gotten here, and then what the process is. And so we file a series of legal instruments called a commercial security agreement, along with several other affidavits. And basically, these are talking specifically about the jurisdiction and who has control over the legal entity, which is your straw man, your uppercase name. Because that is the major thing that happened, is this conveyance where your parents went, yep, we're going to give you away to the state. And it's no blame of your parents. Of course, they were ignorant. They had no idea. And it's actually this whole thing is completely illegal from day one. But unfortunately, we live in a system that's so corrupt that illegal stuff happens all day long. They don't listen to their own rules. And so we have to basically stand up and say no more, because in law there's a concept that is basically called tacit acquiescence, and basically what that means is if you don't respond to somebody or a correspondence, if you have a contract with that person, then your silence is acquiescence. It's agreement. And when you first learn that, it kind of blows your mind. It's just like, that's a crazy concept, but it's a real concept. And it basically, what we are doing is we have never stood up and said, wait a minute, I'm not agreeing to this. I'm not a corporation. I'm not going to be treated like one. I'm not going to be a surety for one. No, you're not going to take all my future labor for the rest of my life and monetize it. And so With the commercial security agreement, we are using commercial law, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. You can look it up online. It's uniform across all 50 states in the United States, and there are international versions of it as well. And we are filing we're creating a security agreement, and we're filing that security agreement in what's called a UCC1 financial statement. And you'll learn more about this in the course, but basically the commercial security agreement basically just says, I'm taking possession of my legal fiction. You're not going to control it anymore. I'm not going to be the surety for it. Um, and I'm being held harmless for the actions that have been taken on behalf of my legal entity. And then we file a series of affidavits, things such as the affidavit of U.S. non-citizenship, which scares lots of people. But once you learn about it in the course, you won't be scared anymore. It's not a good thing to be a U.S. citizen. That means you're in the jurisdiction of the United States, who, by the ways, jurisdiction is only supposed to be the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. And you'll learn about how they get away with having it be outside of that and in this commercial public realm in the course. And then we also file a common law copyright on the name. So you know how you can go out and you can copyright the name of a corporation. So that's what we do with a common law copyright. Common law copyrights are recognized internationally, and we basically copyright the name. So in my case, it'd be Justin in all uppercase letters. And we basically claim that name, and we basically become the trustee or the manager of that corporation or that legal fiction. So once we do that and we complete the filing, then the next step in the process is getting the birth certificate authenticated. Why do we do that? Very briefly, because in the authentication in a legal sense basically means to get it to get a certified copy of that original sworn by the person who created it or the entity who created it, so that it's admissible as evidence in court. So basically, we go to the several different state entities and governmental entities, and we get them to sign a piece of paper that says, this is a certified copy of this is authenticated. It means it's a true copy of the original, which means it's basically the same as the original. And we take that, and then once we have it authenticated, we do a subsequent filing with the UCC called the UCC3 to add on that birth certificate. So basically, why we file everything in the commercial registry is all of this is commerce. It's all commercial law. You have to understand that you are dealing with a corporation in Washington, D.C., and that corporation is basically follows the Uniform Commercial Code. And you are also filing these filings on behalf of your straw man, which is a corporate entity. It's a legal fiction. So when you file these filings with the UCC, you are basically entering in the collateral of the legal entities. When you file the commercial security agreement, it comes along with a attachment. And what is that collateral? It's anything that your corporation owns: your driver's license, your passport, your birth certificate, because these are all pieces of paper. It's all commerce. So by doing that, you are claiming that. It's all about claiming. It's all about taking back that power and possession of that legal fiction. And really, I mean, it's all just about paperwork, because if you think about it, this is all invisible stuff. It's all just in our heads, really, and we've all, agreed to it. We've all acquiesced to it. So we have to stand up and say, we're not doing this anymore. And so, like I said, we talk about and go through in depth in the education what all of these documents are. And then the final step in the process is actually sending out several packets to different governmental entities, subcorporations of the United States, basically giving them public notice that that you have filed this paperwork. And it's a process that if you really wanted to get it done, including all of the education, if you bear down, you could probably do it in a day. You could probably do it in a 14-hour day. I mean, the education is the most, the biggest part of it. And the rest of the process, we can file most of the paperwork within a couple of minutes in the system.
Very good. When people listen to this interview and they say, that sounds really interesting. I would really like to own my identity. I would like to own my driver's license and my birth certificate. Things are going fine as they are, right? I mean, why would they need to take that action? Why would somebody say, I'm doing that? The reason why we want people to do this or to just to know about it, when we can close with this, and this is just an aspect of universal law. What would the world look like if everyone knew this, or even 2% of the population, if they could do this for themselves? How would our world change? And this is the most important part, I think.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think we had one of our legal team members say one day that he thought that once we got to like 100,000 people, the whole system would just collapse, just because there would be so many people exiting the system. Why would you want to do this? Because you have no rights right now. I mean, you have absolutely no rights. I mean, we see it every single day where we're having to wear masks, in every establishment ever because of a silly virus. All of these things that are happening. I mean, you can see all of the police abuse that happens all the time. And really, a lot of those situations, those people wouldn't have been in those situations if they were educated, if they knew their rights, if they understood, if they had taken back their, control over their legal fiction, and if they understood how to speak in to agents of the United States corporation, how to really stand up for yourself. I would say that becoming a secured party is not for the faint of heart. It's not for someone who doesn't want to put in the work. I'm not saying that it's easy, but there are a lot of avenues that for making your life better and for gaining your freedom. And really, for me, I look at this as a spiritual journey. I look at it as the one of the first steps in really gaining your freedom on a esoteric, energetic level, because you have to think about the energy that you're holding when you are submitting to all of these different things that are just oppressive. I mean, hearing about all of these different things, especially that's going on now with this whole coronavirus thing, I just hear these stories about churches being bombarded by cops when they have no warrants and all of these different things. And we can't just roll over and take this. We have to stand up and we have to do something about it, because I want to see a world where our future generations actually have a voice, actually have the opportunity to be a free, living, breathing human being, and not be a debt slave and not be a subject of the state.
And really, that
And,
translates into no war. It translates into real education, real commerce, where your money can't be inflated and deflated away.
Absolutely. Real
And
commerce.
mm-hmm. So
Yes, 100%.
it puts you in
Yeah,
control.
and also yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, this is such an important subject that gets that there's not a lot of information out there, and the information that's out there is all over the place, and you hear about kooks and all this kind of stuff. And we really have narrowed this down to the best of the best. There's over 30 years of freedom fighting people who have put together all of this knowledge in one place. And I don't think there's anything like it out there in the interwebs of knowledge and information about this subject. And we make it so simple and easy to start this process and to become a secured party. And then it's up to you to continue down that road of freedom. And what I love about this as well is creating that community, because once you get out there and you start to learn, you start to grow, and you start to your energy totally changes. You're not afraid anymore. I look outside and I see so many people who are afraid, and I ask myself, why are you afraid? What is it that we need to fear here? It's not. We are the sovereign beings. We are the ones in charge. You have to act like a king and queen. If you don't act like a king or queen, then you're gonna get walked all over. So
Yeah, and if you knew you had standing, you would walk like you did.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So we can conclude here. There's so much more to talk about. There's the trust system, and there's instruments within the SPC. There's build out, and there's continuous upgrades. It's very, very exciting. And even if you're curious to find out about this whole secured party creditor and private versus public, standing versus slavery, and you can find it all at Universal Law. And the most exciting thing, I think, is I've looked into this, I would say 2017, 2016, and I was expected to pay like $3,000 and it was a long, arduous process. The way that it was explained to me was doublespeak and confusing. This is incredibly affordable. This is a gift to humanity.
It is a gift.
It is. It is a gift. So do you want to say how much it is just to get this process? It's amazing.
$22.22 to be able to do our entire educational modules, e-learning course, and also the secured party process with filings from start to finish. And we also have a support team. So if there are confusion along the way or questions, then we've got folks who can answer your questions.
Good. And a lot of people don't like to do, there's a lot of filing that goes on. And that would be a deal breaker just for anyone looking, oh, how do I do all this filing and taking the time? But it's instant, isn't it? Because Universal Law does the filing.
Yeah, it's instant. We are integrated with the system, and it's a few minutes you'll have your filings back. So it's pretty amazing. And we're excited, and we just want as many people as possible to hop on the bandwagon and to start to contribute yourself, because once you start to stand up, that's where our each one of us has many gifts to give to this world. And once you really start to gain that freedom, you can start to share your gifts with the world, and you can bring your knowledge to the table, and we can all move together forward.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody wants to, you can go to 8universallaw8.io and check us out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If the information in this podcast is new to you, or if you would like to uncover more hidden truths and discover exciting ways to empower yourself, please visit the Universal Law website. That is number 8, Universal Law, number 8.io. Universal Law works in tandem with MetaOne Coin Trust, a complete private financial ecosystem based on MetaOne Coin, a private cryptocurrency backed by gold assets. Combined, an individual can convey in commerce with sovereignty, privacy, and freedom, with equity and honor. You can find out more, join the movement, or become a member by visiting metaone.io. Please like and share this podcast. We will always like reading your comments, and we always appreciate your support. I hope this podcast was informative. We will be discussing more of this type of information with Justin in future episodes. Until then, live freely and live abundantly.